Hey everybody, welcome back to the Engineered Angler. A couple of videos ago, I actually copied a lure that's super popular, the Head and Spook Junior. But at the end of the video, where I actually built the lures, I asked everybody to weigh in on what lure they would like to see me sort of copy next, or build if the lure just isn't available anymore, or the version you want to see isn't available. Well, I've had a lot of folks over the years actually ask me to make a flatfish. And a couple of years ago, I did make a video where I made a couple of little Lazy Ike style flatfish lures that were maybe 2 inches, 2.5 inches long. Since that last fishing video last week, I really got enthused to use that trolling camera, and I wanted to build a nice big trolling lure that would be fun to watch in the water with that camera, and also would kind of fulfill a lot of people's requests to make a flatfish. So we're gonna make this flatfish, and we're gonna make it not 3 inches, but actually 6.5 inches, which is about 16.5 centimeters. Now on that last video with the little Lazy Ike lures, I went through how I draw them on a piece of paper and how I come up with the two different radiuses that actually make up this lure, and then how I get the flat spot and everything else. And I'll show you a quick version of how I'm drawing it, and then the locations of the tie-on eye and the two hook eyes sort of fall into place really easily. And my plan is to cut it out of this piece of cedar, which is exactly 1 inch thick. So it's gonna be 1 inch deep and 1 inch wide at the top. So that'll leave that swimming surface on the front pretty wide and pretty effective, I hope. And if this is your first time to the channel, my name's Franco. I'm a professional engineer, a lure designer and lure builder, and an avid fisherman. And I like to make these videos to add just a little bit of physics and engineering to the art of lure making. And before you guys start giving me a hard time about buying me a razor for Christmas, I didn't lose it. I'm just growing a kind of a crappy little beard. It's the holidays. All right, the first thing you want to do is draw a line straight down the center of your page, and this can be drawn on a regular 8.5 by 11. You don't need any kind of special drawing paper. Then you want to mark a little spot for your first center for the arc, no less than 24 centimeters. And I will be working in metric because it's just a little easier for this. And we're going to draw two arcs, one that's 10 centimeters in radius and the other one that's 17 centimeters in radius. And because my draftsman's compass really won't go to 17 centimeters, I went ahead and made a little sort of worksman's compass. And all I did was take a little piece of 1/2 inch stock. This is PVC, but you can use wood. I took a finishing nail and stuck it in there near the bottom and sharpened it, and then drilled holes at the 10 centimeter and the 17 centimeter distance from that nail. So we'll go ahead and draw the biggest arc first. And I drilled these holes so this little cheap mechanical pencil would fit in there. And it's just a matter of placing my nail on my little mark, and I'll hold that nail nice and tight on there, and I'm going to go ahead and draw my arc. Alright, so there's our first arc. Now we measure up from that original mark down at the bottom of this vertical line, 10 centimeters. We move our pencil to the 10 centimeter mark, put the nail at the new mark up here, and draw this new arc. Hopefully the camera can pick that up, but that's our essential shape. Now we got to draw a couple of working lines. I'm going to draw a horizontal line from the two intersections of the arcs, and I'm going to make a mark over to the left from the center line, 1.75 centimeters. And then from the closest center of the arc right here, the last one we used, I'm going to draw a line through the whole thing. And then I'm going to draw lines to create the ends of the lure by just going through that same center point, making sure I got a little thickness at the end of the lure, at least 1/8 of an inch. And on the tail, I'll have it a little thicker, just under 1/4 inch, because that is going to actually have a hook eye on it. Now I'm going to draw from that first ray that we drew to the end ray a straight line that cuts off that curve, and that's going to form the flat spot of the lure. And then measuring down from the top end of that flat spot, 2.5 centimeters will give me the location for the tie-on eye. So let me go ahead and draw in the actual lines in red so you guys can see it better. Alright, there you go. And that first ray marks the location of the belly eye. Of course, we've got our mark for the tie-on eye. And the tail hook eye just goes on the flat spot on the tail. And there you go. All I got to do is put this on the piece of wood and start cutting it out. And I'm going to use some Elmer's spray adhesive just to tack it on there. And trim off the excess. Alright, let's get out there on the saw and get this thing cut out. And the first thing I want to do is cut this angle nice and square. So I'm going to use my radial arm saw because I know that's going to give me a nice square cut. In case you're wondering, the angle is about 48 degrees. Alright, that gives us a nice square front surface. Now it's time to cut out the curves. Alright, so I want the width at the very tail to be right at 3/8 of an inch. So I'll go ahead and mark those limits. And then I just want to go from the widest point, which will be right here at the top of the surface. And I'll just sketch in sort of a curved taper like that. It doesn't have to be perfect. Once we cut it out and start to shape it, we can actually perfect the line. And that's what that's going to look like. Hopefully that knot won't mess with me too much. Got another one up here, but hopefully that'll be okay. As far as all the way up front, I'll probably just round off these corners and leave this pretty much full width. I'll sort of soften the edges a little bit. And I'll take the bulk of this off with the bandsaw. This is kind of worn, so let's go ahead and start off with a brand new belt. You can see that brand new belt really makes quick work of this. I'll get back to you when I'm a lot closer. But before I get too carried away getting a really nice sort of refined finish on the sanding job here, I need to do one more thing to this thing. We need to cut a slot down the middle of it, right across the top, from the point where the tie and eye will come out to the point where the tail hook eye will come out too. And we've got to embed a harness in there that will come down, come over, come down to form the belly eye, back up into the body, and then all the way to the back. So we need to cut a slot all the way across there. And I'll do that with the Dremel tool. And to mark the location of those eyes, I'm using another drawing that I had already made. And I'm going to mark the belly eye, and I'm just checking my mark for the tie-on eye, and that looks good. And I went ahead and drew a line more or less down the center, and that's what I'm going to follow to cut into. Alright, that should do it. We got it nice and straight all the way back and halfway down the little flat spot on the back. So the next step I need to do is to drill a hole that connects this surface with the inside of the slot. I think I'm seeing daylight through there. Yeah, it went through. Now we need to bend the wire. So let's look at what the wire is actually going to look like bent and installed in the body. On the very end, at the tail, that's the only eye that will be a twist eye. From there, it'll arc along the groove we cut, come down, form a loop, come back up, come up to where the tie-on eye will be, go up, form a loop, and then come back, and it will partially drop into that same bore we did. Now having this wire sort of separated from itself is important. I'll show you why. Now this is a blow up of that section of the wire where it forms the tie-on eye and the belly hook eye. And lots of lure makers like to to do their eyes, to come up and then hug the wire back and even do a wrap or even glue that wire together there. But actually, that's not as strong as forming this separation, because what happens here is that we're going to end up filling the groove that we cut into the lure, and therefore all this will be filled up with epoxy resin. And having those two members separated and then filled in between gives it a lot more strength than if they were together. It's a lot less likely to bend up here, bend inside the lure at all. This will be very difficult to straighten in this configuration. This way you don't have to use some really thick wire that's really hard to work with, and instead you can use a wire that's plenty strong enough and now plenty stiff enough. And by drawing the harness inside a scale drawing of the lure, I can go ahead and measure out how much I'm going to need, how much wire I'm going to need forward of the belly eye and behind the belly eye. And I'm using 360-pound stainless steel leader wire, which is way more than you would ever need for a lure like this. So with the loop run through and sticking out the other side, I'm just going to take the end that goes to the tie-on eye, bend it way over, and then make a kink where it needs to bend back. And now I'll take that kink and get this bent all the way over, and I'll put a little bit of a kink at the end. I would have liked to have a little longer, but it's not going to matter that much. If you're really worried about strength, you can have it bend over and go back down into the hole a lot farther, maybe another 1/4 of an inch. But I'll live with this little 1/8 inch kink. I think it'll work just fine. Let's see what it looks like in there. All right, that's going to look fine. As soon as I get it bent down just a little farther, that's going to work great. And we'll kink the back part of the wire so we can get that bend started. And we get that bend going, and it's going to have an arch in it, so we'll kind of work on arching it, and it'll come down, stick out over here. All I got to do is kink it right where it comes out at the tail. And now I'll make that twist eye for the tail hook, and this wire is right at the very limit of this little twister to handle. And I'm just going to give it a couple of twists and cut off the excess. So now let's do a little dry fit. We might have to adjust it a little bit, but I think we got it pretty close. So I'll slide it halfway down into that hole, and then I just pull this back to get it to fit in. And you can see how it kind of custom fits right there at the very back. And then we can shove the rest of it like so. So it fits pretty much as designed. And it's just a matter of filling the slot with some 2-part fast setting 5-minute epoxy. And I'll be using the Gorilla Glue, and I've gone ahead and put tape on both sides of the slot, and I made sure that it covered up the hole at the bottom too, so it doesn't ooze out of there. And I'm going to use the miniature piping bag method, which means a little tiny Ziploc. So the idea is you just sort of squeeze the glue into the bag, and then you zip it in, and then move all the stuff to the bottom and start kneading. You move it all best you can, all to one corner, and then you carefully snip just the very tip off of the one corner. All right, looks pretty good. And then I'll just take this little stick and just scrape off the excess, just to make sure I don't have a huge cleanup afterwards. Right, and usually this stuff shrinks down into it a little bit, and I end up having to top it off with some UV resin. But I prefer that because the UV resin's just a lot easier to sand anyway. All right, I'm pretty happy with that. I'm gonna go ahead and let that sit overnight. But I think I'll take the tape off before I go. A lot less sanding. That's a lot better for me. So I'll see you guys tomorrow. All right, I've gone ahead and done a couple of things off camera. I drilled in the eye sockets on both sides, obviously, and I went ahead and put a light seal on the wood using some Minwax polyacrylic, and I just gave it one decent coat and let it drip dry. And I was doing that in preparation for the next step, and that is working out how much weight to add to it. And we're going to do that starting off by finding the volume of the lure using the water displacement method. And if you want to get a really detailed way of figuring this stuff out, knowing how much weight to put in your lures, then you should probably watch the video that I'm linking here above me somewhere. I've got this homemade container here filled with water, and I'm going to turn the scale on with this thing on there, so I get a 0. And the idea is to submerge it in water, having it not touch the bottom or the sides, and trying not to get too much of my little holders in the water as well. So I got 68.03 grams, and what that means is that I've displaced 68.03 grams of water, which is equivalent to 68.03 cubic centimeters. So the volume of the lure is 68.03. What that also means is that this lure would have to weigh more than 68 grams, including all its hooks and everything, for it to begin to sink. Now, I don't want it to sink. I want it to float, but I don't want it to be a really strong floater. I don't want it to be like a bobber on the top. I want it to dive down and then slowly rise to the water column. So I'm going to use my rule of thumb that I explained in the video I just linked a minute ago, and we'll drill a hole in the bottom of the lure just forward of the hook hanger there, and that's where I'm going to put my lead because I want the lure to be head heavy. Now I need to let this thing dry. I'm going to go ahead and put it in the little oven at about 150 degrees and leave it in there for like 20 or 25 minutes. Hopefully that'll get it good and dry. In the meantime, I want to go ahead and dress up a treble hook to put on the back of this thing. All right, that should do it. That should have a nice little bit of an action at the very tail when this thing is moving. So our next step in a weight calculation is to go ahead and weigh the lure with the hardware. So here are the 2 hooks and split rings and the lure. We've got 37.08. So if I subtract that from the weight in the water, which was 68.03, I get 30.95. That's the maximum amount of weight that I could put in it before it starts to sink. Now, I don't want it to sink. All I really want to do is slow it down on its way up. So I want the weight about 20% less than the suspending weight. So 20% less than about 68 grams. So that means adding about 13 grams to this thing. So we need a weight that's around 13.6, but I'll take anything from 13 to 14. And this thing's exactly 14.03. So this one ball should do it. Now it's just a matter of filling this up, and I'll just go ahead and use some sawdust and UV resin, and we'll get this baby sealed up. And I'll let the sawdust sort of absorb it a little bit before I add some more. And we'll hit it with the light, and I'll fill it up until I've got a little bit to sand off. And that's got it about right. I'll be able to sand that back a little bit. And now I'm going to go ahead and just finish filling in this slot that has just the slightest bit of hollow in it. And I'll do the same. I'll just fill it up so I know I've got a little bit to sand back. And I'll get back to you guys when I'm done sanding this stuff all smooth again. Alright, got that groove nicely smoothed out, and that patch is nice and smooth too. The polyacrylic actually lifted up a lot of the grain, so I had to sand everything back. Because our next step is to put a really thin clear coat on it to prep it for painting. So I'll wipe it down with some alcohol and we'll get a clear coat on it. And I'll let it turn just a little bit, just to get a little bit of bubbles that are in it to pop out. And then I'll turn the lights on and we'll get back to it when it's set. We'll be ready to go into the paint booth and do some painting. It's time to get in the paint booth and start painting. It's going to be a little noisy with the extractor fan going, so you'll have to put up with my voiceover and the background music. As usual, I'll start off with opaque white as a base coat. Alright, now we can go with the silver. Alright, so now I want to put a macro pattern on it. So I've got this little template, but I don't want to just do one color. I want to do two colors. I want to do sort of a blue-gray background and then a metallic white foreground. So what I'll do is and this is the plan, I'm not sure it'll work, but I'm going to put it on here, spray the dark, and then when that dries, I'll move it over just a hair and spray sort of a forward-looking color. It'll look a little 3D, I think. And I'll use these clips to help weight it so it lays a little flatter. And I'm using a transparent color. It's called Ghost Tint Midnight Blue, but it's actually kind of a gray. Okay, that's got our dark stripes. All right. Now just move it slightly back. That looks pretty cool. Oh yeah, that looks really nice. All right, now I want to add a little more sort of pizzazz. I want a brighter color here. So I'm going to get some of this fluorescent hot pink just on the belly, wider here, and then just sort of narrowing down to almost nothing about here. And now we'll use pearl red for the last of it. All right, I'm gonna let that dry and then put the eyes on it and we'll clear coat. But first, a couple of coats of polyacrylic as a mid coat to seal the paint. Now I just need to have enough patience to let this thing completely dry. And this is the last step before we can actually take it to the water and test it. A nice thick clear coat with UV resin. Ugh, I actually dropped it on the floor. Look at this. It's got crap all over it. Now I gotta wipe all this stuff off. Start again. All right, well, I had to let it set, and then I took it out, sanded it lightly, cleaned it with alcohol, reapplied another good thick coat. And while it's not perfect, because it's not gonna be perfect after actually dropping it, it looks pretty nice. I gotta say, I really like the paint job. I like the combination of colors. I think this thing is gonna look cool in the water. I'm gonna put the hooks on it, and then it's time to get on the lake. All right, we're down here at the lake. This is not my lake. This is Big Lake Santa Fe. I'm in a little tiny bay here, and hopefully the water clarity is gonna be good enough for us to see this thing underwater. But before we go underwater, let's just tie it onto a rod and see how it casts and how it looks retrieving. Hopefully I won't have to tune it too much. I could have probably added another 5 grams of weight to it, but it sure looks really nice in the water. It casts really easy, and a bit of good news here, while I did have to do a little bit of tuning, it was trying to go a little bit left on me. It didn't take me very long to get it tuned in. But then, a little bit of bad news. The GoPro shut down and just wouldn't turn on again. GoPro died, thank you very much. And I only brought one GoPro dummy, me, and it's a bit of a trek back to the house, so it'll have to wait till next time. Sorry guys. I will owe you some underwater shots of this one. But if you got any questions on this build, let me know. And if you got some strong opinions about what I should make next, let me know in the comments. And hopefully I'll have another video out before the Christmas break, probably fishing again. Alright guys, thanks for watching. Don't forget to drop me a like, and if you want to see another really cool build, click on this video right here. Alright guys, I'll see you next time.